Welcome to episode 9
of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast.
I'm your host, Shannon Crow, and we can thank Colton, my 14-year-old son, for helping me out with today's introduction. So as many of you know, I'm a mother of 3, a yoga teacher, and I'm also a consultant for yoga teachers and studios. This podcast was born out of how I feel between yoga teacher trainings. I sometimes feel isolated in the wilderness of yoga entrepreneurship. For me, a yoga teacher training really offers me growth and learning and the motivation to practice, but most of all, it offers me a supportive community of other yoga teachers. When I'm out teaching weekly classes and not in a training, I miss these elements. So I wanted to create a place where we could all feel connected to knowledge, inspiration, and community. So here we are, listening to experts on a variety of topics. Today wraps up our 3-part mini-series on pelvic health. In episode 7, we heard from Trista Zinn. She talked to us about breath and pelvic health. Then last week, we heard from Kim Vopny, who talked to us about core breath, pelvic health, and we also touched on Kegels. Today, we get to talk to Shelly Prosko and hear her intake on Kegels, Muhla Bandha, and pelvic health. Shelly Prosko has been a physical therapist since 1998. She's also a professional yoga therapist and a Pilates instructor. Shelly has a unique ability of sharing her passion on pelvic health and other topics in a way that is really easy to understand. She has a warm and calm nature and so much knowledge, as you will soon hear. Shelly tells us today about the journey of bringing together physical therapy and medical therapeutic yoga. As well as being a healthcare practitioner, Shelly is also a figure skater who has traveled the world with many professional ice shows. I connected with Shelly out of my own curiosities and questions. I had a lot of questions about the difference and similarities of Kegels and Muhla Bandha, what we also refer to as root lock in yoga. There's lots of information here for anyone who's interested in pelvic health. So let's dive in. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Shelly.
Thanks so much for talking to our group. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to get going.
So tell, for anyone who doesn't know what you do, so you have Physio Yoga, and tell us what that is, and if you can, kind of the story of Physio Yoga.
Okay, that's really long, right? I started practicing yoga first in the early 90s, and then I became a physical therapist in the late 90s, graduated in 1998. And then I started to just kind of organically use yoga, different methods. Mostly it was just asana practice at the beginning. And I would just use different poses in my physical therapy practice as I was working with my patients. I worked in an outpatient orthopedic clinic. And then my yoga practice started deepening. Now, this was before, all the 200-hour yoga teacher trainings and that. So I was just my own personal practice and deepening. Maybe I would take some seminars and workshops. And then I started realizing, there's more to it than just these poses, and getting more and learning more about breathing and meditation and more about yoga philosophy. And it just naturally really started to fit so well into my physiotherapy sessions with my patients. And so that's really where it all started. I mean, I didn't call it physio yoga right away. At the time, I was looking to maybe quit physical therapy and just become a yoga teacher. And I thought, I can still have all this physiotherapy knowledge, and I can work with people and just do yoga. Because I was having a hard time, integrating the yoga into the physio how I wanted to in the way the system was set up. But then this brochure came along. It was mailed to me, and it was, I think at that time it was called Therapeutic Yoga or Professional Yoga Therapy for the Healthcare Professional. And so it was like perfect timing. It was exactly what I wanted. So I enrolled in that course. That was Ginger Garner's course, the Professional Yoga Therapy Institute, and it was medical therapeutic yoga. So kind of a long story, but basically just over the years, I took that training, and then that really catapulted, my career of bringing this physio and integrating it into yoga. And then I just, as far as calling it physio yoga, it was a term I just came up with. Then you want to make your brand and you want to build your website. Yeah, I thought of a few different names, and I thought, okay, how about physio yoga? So really what it is, it's just integrating physiotherapy and yoga methods and philosophy for a more sort of well-rounded or biopsychosocial approach to my patient care, right? For a more patient-empowered approach to rehab and healing and overall health promotion.
That's fantastic. That's so needed nowadays. And it's fascinating to me to hear your story from the physiotherapy side of things, and that you were kind of feeling like there was a struggle, and then something clicked and you were able to bring yoga in. That's amazing. I sometimes feel like I'm on the other side of things. I feel like as a yoga teacher, I feel like I want to know more about physiotherapy or just the healthcare side of things. And so I reach out and study a little bit more and then bring that into my yoga classes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the beauty of this integration, and what I'm seeing in different groups I'm involved with. Some are Facebook groups and others are just other organizations, and and it's the two worlds. So we've got the yoga world, whether you're a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, or a yoga student, that whole yoga industry or yoga world wanting more of the healthcare side, or more evidence-based, Western sort of science-based, right? And then the other side, the healthcare side, small portion, wanting to learn more about, what is this yoga, and is it just all these yoga poses, or is there more to it than that? Of course, a lot of people, I believe, know, or they feel, I shouldn't say they know, but they feel that yoga is more than just poses. I think that, a lot of people think, well, it's got some breathing and relaxation, and so that they know, right, that there's something a little bit more than just the physical.
And so who do you mostly work with then? Healthcare providers or yoga teachers, or a mix of both?
A mix. Yeah, a mix. So some of my offerings and trainings are exclusively for healthcare professionals if I'm working with like a physiotherapy division or something like that. But then I also teach at yoga therapy schools. So I'll have, the yogis come in there, and then I have my own workshops and courses who I open up to everybody. So I get a lot of yoga teachers attending those, as well as for the general population. So even people who have never done yoga before come to some of my courses. So yeah, a huge mix, which makes it exciting, keeps it fresh. But to be honest, when they're all in one room, it makes it challenging for the teacher, right? Because you want to teach to everyone. It's a little different. But I really enjoy, as much as of a challenge as it is, I actually really do enjoy when everyone's in one room. It's an amazing energy, and we all learn to get together and get along and learn from each other with this mutual respect, and how yoga can really bring people together. And you're at the end of the workshop or the end of the course, and it's just beautiful to see the relationships made and even the networking, so that the yoga teachers know where to refer, and healthcare professionals know where to refer in their community for yoga. And so I don't want to give that mix up, even though it's challenging to teach. I think it's valuable.
That's so valuable, not only for the people who are in it, but so valuable then for the people that they're going out and working with, whether it's healthcare professionals, like you said, and then referring to a yoga teacher, or yoga teacher then knowing, okay, this person really specializes in that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks. And I like I said, I really want to try to continue to make that work, because like I said, it is challenging, and I'm sure you can appreciate that, right? Like when you're working on your course or your material, and you have to know your target population. So it's just easier if you're teaching than speaking to one group.
Right.
But And then of course, as humans, we all have our insecurities. So then you're thinking, well, the healthcare people, like they're not gonna like that part of it. And the yoga teachers, that's not gonna be good for them. So you want to please everybody. And so I get a little bit stressed about it, but it's, like I said, at the end of the day, it's so valuable and much needed. And it's always, the feedback I get is always really positive.
Would you suggest anything in terms of yoga teachers wanting to be more integrated with the healthcare system? Do you have any basic tips that you would tell them kind of start here or have this mindset?
There's a lot of different ways that I would want to answer that, depending on what exactly the intent is. So if it's more that the yoga teacher wants to work alongside healthcare professionals, or that the yoga teacher wants more training and wants to work with clients in a more specialized way.
Okay, so if it was that they want to be able to work alongside and have that relationship of the referral back and forth, then what would that look like?
Some of this I feel is kind of common sense, but number one is just really trying to build relationships. And so then the next follow-up question to that is, well, how do you do that? And I mean, that's the golden question if you're any kind of business person, I guess. How do you get out there and network and build relationships? And I would say some of the ways are just as a yoga teacher, people coming into your classes. There are probably a number of people who are already healthcare professionals that are coming, and even not maybe to your classes, but maybe to one of your colleagues' classes. So I would first say reaching out to those healthcare professionals that already have a yoga practice, because they'll already sort of be on board, and maybe offering small even talks or in-services, or whether it's at their workplace, maybe you could offer something that's of value to them. What do they get out of it? So something for them personally, for self-care. Practitioner burnout and compassion fatigue is definitely on the rise, especially I think in a lot of healthcare professions, but in dentistry, medicine, and physiotherapy. I've done some talks and research there, and we know that that's on the rise. So, maybe even for self-care, and then of course for patient care, getting to know, finding out how yoga can help maybe calm the nervous system, maybe help to reduce pain in their patient population. So I guess really targeting that specific group, whether it is physios or occupational therapists or whatever group it is, and knowing what their needs are. Maybe it's a specific cancer rehabilitation group, and they're looking for some techniques to, like I said, calm the nervous system, to help with pain control or pain reduction, or perhaps, since I work in the pelvic health world, maybe a women's health department or clinic, how can yoga maybe help with the pelvic pain by calming, again, that nervous system. And so there's a variety of breathing techniques that a yoga teacher knows, mindfulness, meditation methods. And then the movements, of course, gets a little bit trickier because you kind of need that one-on-one, to be able to assess and know what that person needs. But if you can talk with a healthcare professional as a yoga teacher, then the healthcare professional can tell you, well, we would really like if this particular person could have more, let's say they need to work on their standing balance, more. Right. And they have to avoid, the only thing is that they have to avoid some spinal extension activities. But other than that, they're, pretty safe to do some balance activities. And it's just talking to the healthcare professional and seeing what they need. I did a talk at the Symposium on Yoga Therapy and Research last year on that topic of how to sort of integrate yoga into healthcare, whether you're a healthcare professional trying to bring it to the yoga world, or if you're a yoga person trying to bring it into the healthcare world. And so it was a little more organized and, outlined and articulate. But
that would be fantastic. If you do find it, then I will put it in with our show notes.
Yeah.
I find also, you said build relationships and go and do a talk for them. One thing that worked really well at our studio is that we had a pelvic floor physiotherapist come in and do a workshop, and we had a lot of our teachers there. And from there, she started referring to our teachers, and that's actually how I got working at a physiotherapy office myself.
Oh, that's brilliant. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Great idea. Yeah. So bringing in the healthcare professional right into, and then see, there's that mutual benefit, right? Like that's just the way, we have to kind of see, okay, what can this healthcare professional get from either, you going there or for bringing them in? And, I agree that they'd probably be more open, right, to having that healthcare professional come into your studio doing something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, it worked really well for us, and the relationship is very much there. Like, I appreciate it so much to be able to go and ask, our local physiotherapist when I'm just in that office, like, okay, when we're working with the same people.
Yeah. And I will say, in my experience over the years, it does make a difference when you have met the person rather than cold calls, or like, let's say you're a yoga teacher and you have some great short online offerings, like maybe you have a few breath practices or some yoga poses, and you want to kind of offer that up to some of the healthcare professionals for their clients to use as an adjunct or as a complement to their treatment. But if you don't know the person, even if you could write up the best little letter, or, you could send out an email, a mass email to different practices, healthcare practices in different organizations. But, most likely though, unless they're really interested in it and something sparks their interest, they likely will ignore it unless they know you. So right. Yes, that personal relationship is huge.
Oh, that's true. I really like your idea of having a small talk for healthcare professionals that would really benefit them, like going in and saying, hey, I've got this thing. And I think that's a great way too.
Yeah, when we experience things on our own, that's extremely valuable. And oftentimes what can happen, when the healthcare professional and they're experiencing whatever experience you give them, whatever result from that practice, they'll automatically think, oh, that would be great to use for my patient. I mean, that's how I started out. I started out, like I said, early 90s, just practicing on my own. Never thought to teach, it was nothing to do with that. Didn't even know I was going to be a physiotherapist at that time. And then it was just, like I said, organic and natural once I started working with my patients as a physio, just because of all the experiences that I was having and the benefits and results from yoga. I just knew to use that with my patients. Hey, this might really help them as well, and so it is a great door to go through.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I did want to ask you one question along that. How has that lens of being trained as a physiotherapist first, how did that affect you studying and then teaching yoga? Was there anything that you feel like this component is kind of missing from the yoga teacher training, or that your knowledge of the body and physiotherapy really added something to it?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, as a physiotherapist, I mean, we have extensive training in anatomy and physiology and kinesiology and neuro rehab and pediatrics, geriatrics, learning styles, barriers to learning. I mean, it's an extensive program. So, I think in a 200-hour yoga teacher training, of course, there's going to be lots of areas where they fall short, but I'm not so sure that much more can be added. I mean, of course, we always have to look at the actual training. There's so many different kinds out there, obviously, and we want to make, I think, the anatomy and the physiology part, it's so hard. I like to say maybe more applicable or more functional. I'm not sure how what am I trying to say here? Important or valuable it is to spend, like, just in that 200 hours, what's the most valuable things that you need to learn? And do you want to spend, X amount of time on learning the origin and the insertion of a certain muscle?
Right.
Like, I don't know the answer. But personally, I feel like I don't know how valuable that is. Like, if we want to learn, like, the anatomy and the physiology, like, I think you have to take a separate course to learn that, or as a yoga teacher, continuing on the training. Well, as a person of life, always continuing to learn, obviously a student of life.
For me, I finished a 200-hour yoga teacher training, and then I had more questions than I ever imagined.
Perfect. Yeah. And I think, yes, it's such a great conversation, because I think that a lot of the yoga teacher trainings and yoga entry-level yoga teachers, of course, they fall short on, anatomy and physiology and biomechanics. And of course they need to learn more, and I need to keep learning more too. So, but I guess the question is, so do we just take that 200 hours and just pump in more anatomy and biomechanics? And I don't know, I mean, maybe, but we have to look at yoga. Like, what is yoga? It's not just the physical asana practice. Right. So a basic 200-hour yoga teacher training, what is the intent of it? The intent of it is so that people can come out of the trainings to teach healthy populations. It's not therapeutic, right? You're not responsible for looking at fixing people's problems, or it's just to teach a class, learn different sequences, teach a class. Hopefully the yoga teacher training, you come out with yoga philosophy, and like I said, some breathing and meditation. What yoga really isn't, to teach a nice yoga class. And
that's good. It's a good answer. And I'm sorry, it's a tough question.
It is tough, yeah. And to start, and then of course you have to build on that and learn. You have to continue to learn, right? We all know that. You never stop at 200 hours. I mean, that just doesn't even make sense.
Mm-hmm. So one big question that I have for you, because this is how I got to even know about you. I had gone to your website, and I really appreciate a post that you did. I will make sure that I put a link to it in our show notes here. It's called Pelvic Floor Galore: Resources for Creating Pelvic Floor Health Through Yoga. And I see that it was posted February 22nd, just looking at it now, but you put a lot of things in this one article, which I really appreciate. A big focus for me, for sure, is pelvic floor health. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about Mulha Bandha and Kegels. If you want to walk us through that, like even if you want to start from the very basics of defining like Mulha Bandha and a Kegel and things that you see, or more information that would help yoga teachers, that would be great.
Okay, yeah, that's an exciting topic. First, let's maybe start with the Kegel. That's easier for me. Well, actually, some people do define it differently, but a Kegel is an engagement or a contraction of the pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor muscles, of course, span across the pelvic floor. So they attach from the pubic bone, the side walls of the pelvis, the tailbone, and then there's not just muscles, but there's, fascia and ligaments and membranes and all kinds of different goodies down there. And there's different layers. And so I'm not going to get too detailed about that, but I think just for this conversation about the Kegel versus Mulha Bandha, just knowing that, okay, there's these pelvic floor muscles, and a healthy pelvic floor muscle, the group of the pelvic floor muscles, in order for these to be healthy, they need to be able to relax, they need to be able to engage, and they need to be able to go through their full excursion. So the pelvic diaphragm, or the pelvic floor, moves in timing with the breath. So we know this. Research shows this now, in timing with our respiratory diaphragm. So they both move. So right now you're sitting there, Shannon, you're breathing. I'm talking and trying to breathe as I talk. And the respiratory and pelvic diaphragms in a healthy individual will be going up and down together, the same direction. So you inhale, both the pelvic diaphragm and the respiratory diaphragm descend and go down. And then when you exhale, they both go up. So that's a healthy pelvic floor. And we need that excursion so that the pelvic floor can do a variety of its roles, right?
Okay.
I won't go into all the roles. I don't think that's part of the question, but we can ask, I can go through it later if you want, but it's important. It has a lot of different roles, not just bowel and bladder function. So a Kegel is an engagement or a contraction. And what we know now is that, well, there is some discrepancy, I guess, out there, to Kegel or not to Kegel, and are you a pro-Kegler or are you anti-Kegel? And, and really it's a tough question to answer, but a Kegel, an isolated Kegel it has its place, but it's not functional. And in fact, for some conditions, Kegels are not recommended. The American Urological Association 2014 guidelines actually recommend against using a Kegel for a variety of for bladder pain syndrome and interstitial cystitis, where there's pelvic pain. So conditions basically where there's pelvic pain, or if the pelvic floor muscles are overactive. And that's I could talk now another hour about an over-recruited or an overactive pelvic floor. And I think what I'll say to keep it short is just, we would be surprised out there as to how many men and women are walking out there with an overactive pelvic floor. And I do quickly want to say this because I'm excited about it. It's just a new research just came out in 2016, and there was a research on it was with Caroline Van Dyken and Dufour, and they researched 100 women with chronic low back pain, and 90% had pelvic floor dysfunction, and over 80%, I think it was like 83%, the pelvic floors were over recruited.
Wow.
Another study, 2007, was a balance study, and it showed that the women, I think it was women again, that were incontinent, so had leaky leakage, urinary leakage, had poorer balance. Without getting into all the details why, that kind of makes sense, just because the pelvic floor is involved in the core and core strategies. And so I think, okay, but here's what's really interesting. Out of those women that had the pelvic floor dysfunction that were incontinent, they actually had an increased pelvic floor muscle activation. So the pelvic floor is dysfunctional. Everybody thinks Kegel, right?
Yes.
You're leaking, you're whatever. Yeah. But actually, and not always, so I'm not making a blanket statement here, but often times it could be that the pelvic floor is actually activating too much. So it has to move in excursion. Like I said, it's just like the respiratory diaphragm is moving up and down, so does the pelvic floor.
Right.
Now, yes, we need to it does still need to be able to be engaged voluntarily, right, at times. But just for a natural everyday motion, it needs to move. And even when you are doing, exercises, or let's say you're doing your yoga practice, there's going to be a different amount of engagement of the pelvic floor, but it's still moving. So even when the pelvic floor goes down, when you're inhaling, it's an eccentric engagement. So just because it's going down doesn't necessarily mean it's totally relaxed. Now, if you're at rest, you do want to, have it relaxed and have it just flow up and down normally. You don't have to do anything. It's doing this on its own, by the way.
And just to back things up a little bit, when you said, if the pelvic floor is overactive, and if there's any yoga teachers listening and thinking, wow, how would I know, or what do I do? The great thing about being a yoga teacher, if you're not a physiotherapist, is then you are referring that person to a physiotherapist, or you're having the conversation with their pelvic floor physio, which is what I love about having that relationship with a healthcare professional is, I don't have to know. They will tell me, and then I know the yoga that will help them with that. Or I then ask them, what can we do together with this person? So
yes, perfect. You said that so well. That's perfect. That's exactly it. And myself, I do not do internal exams. So I'm not a pelvic floor physiotherapist that is trained in internal exams. So I do not know if someone has a pelvic floor, if their pelvic floor muscle is over-recruited. You can't really know that unless you're doing actual, internal palpation or real-time ultrasound or things like that can sometimes show. There are, though, signs and symptoms that you could maybe say, there's a chance that it could be. And that's, again, still maybe not for the yoga teacher to know, because like you said, you just got to find out, let the healthcare professional tell you, hey, I want you to really work on relaxing and releasing the pelvic floor with this person. Do your magic, get all the tools out of your toolbox and do whatever you can, to help calm this person's nervous system and help relax that pelvic floor. So there's that. There are signs that you can see. And I do have actually, I don't know if I have this blog post up, but there are things, if people that tend to have tight, or if you see them engaging their neck muscles or jaw, there's a link with the floor of the mouth and the jaw to the pelvic floor. So you can see if someone's a real clencher at the jaw, or an accessory muscle breather, so they're using their chest more, like the neck muscles to breathe. And you see the neck muscles really sculpted, and they can't really get the breath into the nice lower lateral rib cage expansion, or they have problems with abdominal breathing, belly breathing. And, they're holding their abdominals. Sometimes people that tend to overtrain the abdominals, you'll see like even really apparently fit or seemingly fit athletes that can be common, that they also have overactive pelvic floors. So, you don't really know. You can't make these blanket statements, but like I said, there are sometimes things that you can see, and sometimes in the hips too, if you're noticing that the hips are somewhat tight. I say tight in air quotes. In case Jules Mitchell is listening, but
tell us who Jules Mitchell is.
So Jules Mitchell do you know her?
No, I don't.
Oh, you'll have to have her on your show. So Jules Mitchell, she's in California. She is I'm trying to get her credentials. I know she's a massage therapist, a yoga practitioner, yoga, I'm not sure her title and credentials, but basically she does research on the science of stretching. And she has a book coming out this year that I think every yoga teacher and healthcare professional that's interested in yoga should read. I don't know her working title of it, but it's basically going to be about redefining stretching.
Oh, I definitely need to get to
particularly in yoga. Yeah, she talks about flexibility versus extensibility, and just the science surrounding stretching and passive stretching versus active, and is what's happening when we're stretching. Are we really changing the biomechanics, or really changing not the biomechanics, sorry, or when we're stretching, are we really changing the tissue structure?
Right.
Or is it just, a nervous system response? Is it just tissue tolerance? And so I think with the whole Kegel thing, just doing an isolated Kegel isn't always what people need to do, and it's just an isolated activity. It's not really functional.
I think, just summing up, that it can also be the opposite of what someone needs.
Right. And particularly when there are issues going on, like I said, whether it's pelvic pain syndromes or pelvic pain dysfunctions, bowel and bladder, urinary urgency or frequency or constipation, all kinds of different back pain, SI joint pain, pelvic pain, as I said. So a lot of times with those, sometimes that can exacerbate those things. And there's other studies that have shown that when people are even shown how to do a Kegel, even one-on-one, they still don't do them right. They do the opposite. They bear down and push down, and so that's not healthy either. So there's that whole thing as well. Like if you're a yoga teacher and you're trying to teach someone to engage their pelvic floor, or try to engage Mulha Bandha or do a Kegel, there's a good chance. I think the last statistic that I read was 50% are not doing it correctly, even after one-on-one instruction.
Right.
So you can imagine in a class. So, again, you have to just look at the intent and what are you trying to do? And so that's, and then just to further on that, there are other ways to help optimize the function of the pelvic floor. So with some of the studies out there showing with just awareness exercises and breathing and functional movements can help optimize that pelvic floor function. So relaxation, engagement, and the excursion. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. You can, I'm sure you'll have my article posted, the one you talked, or no, you didn't talk about that one yet, the Optimizing Pelvic Floor Health through Yoga Therapy.
Okay, I will put a link to that.
It's a nice article. It just summarizes, everything really nicely. It's a nice article. So then you want to talk about Mulha Bandha now?
Yeah.
I'm not a bandha expert. What I've been taught about the bandhas is that they are energetic locks, right? They're really meant for locking and sealing and channeling prana. Is that how you understand them as?
Yes.
Right? So to seal that energy and channel it. And also from what I understand, bandhas were, you have to look again at the intent. And when they were first brought here, which I understand again, that it was maybe around 20 or 30 years ago that they started to become more popular here in the West and started to be taught. And it was first introduced as you engage the bandhas when you are still, when you're typically in a seated position, and when you're holding your breath. Like the bandhas are meant to be engaged with a pranayama practice.
Right.
And then somehow, as the years went on, the translation perhaps was lost, and all of a sudden, and we're moving now and doing asana practice, and the bandhas were now all of a sudden used in asana practice, and particularly in some of the more flow practices, and depending on your lineage and where you're from, I know that some yoga teachers are taught to engage Mulha Bandha throughout the whole practice, or even engage it and hold it in for that entire, sequence, or even just the pose. And Leslie Kaminoff, that might be another link. I don't know how many links you want in your show notes, but it's a really nice video. It's about 5 minutes or 6 minutes long. And Leslie talks about, the Mulha Bandha from this historical perspective, and says a little bit of what I just said, but he says he thinks, perhaps it was lost in translation, and we're not supposed to, be holding and squeezing that anal sphincter throughout the whole practice. Now, again, I can't speak for, different lineages and the intent behind that. Like maybe the intent is okay to hold that Mulha Bandha so that you keep that energy in throughout the whole practice, but I question that, and I do agree with Leslie, and I think translation maybe was lost, because it makes more sense to me that those locks and bandhas are held when you are doing a pranayama practice, where you're trying to contain that prana. And then the other thing I can speak to on this is, all that I do know is, now we flip back to the Western healthcare, Western science world, and biomechanics. And what we know is that the pelvic floor does move with the breath. And it is the role of that pelvic floor. It plays a role in core strategy. And just like when you're in plank or any other yoga pose, you're not supposed to engage and contract and squeeze hard the abdominals, pelvic floor, anything else, because we need the respiratory diaphragm and the pelvic floor to be moving. That is part of core. Part of the core strategy is that these muscles have to move up and down with the breath. And it's a sophisticated, timed, coordinated team with transverse abdominis and multifidus. And none of these muscles are just held rigid. So you don't just hold in TA or multifidi and then start moving. These muscles are all moving in a certain fashion.
And it sounds like then trying to hold Mulha Bandha is going against everything then, like holding it with movement.
Right. It just, from a biomechanical perspective, from what we know, what the pelvic floor is supposed to do and how it's supposed to move, that doesn't make sense. And then furthermore, from other research showing that there's a high prevalence of people with pelvic floors that are over-recruited. And again, I could go into a variety of reasons why, because we're told to, train the abdominals more, to hold, or we're told to do the Kegel or to hold aesthetics as well, right? We think that we have to hold those abdominals in. There's an emotional link, and don't get me started on that, and anxiety and stress that can cause those muscles to engage a little bit more. Postural habits, lots of sitting can cause those muscles to engage more, and a few other ones. But basically, if those pelvic floor muscles are already over recruiting for a whole host of reasons, particularly in our culture, then why would we be adding to that?
Right. That's so helpful. And so I think it's important, I mean, I come from a lineage that my first yoga teacher training was Kundalini, and we did use Mula Bandha, not necessarily in movement, but it was used a lot. And I think it's just good then to have the eyes of you're just going to question and just keep learning on both sides of things, like yoga philosophy, you know, the medical world, new research, and keep asking questions, keep questioning both sides.
Absolutely. And, some of those, the yogic traditions and ancient yoga wisdom and yoga philosophy, I mean, like you said, question and look into it. And I believe, there's something to the bandhas and engaging and holding. I don't think there's anything wrong, with that, but it's just how we translate it, and when to do it and what's the intent. And like I said, what I want to share with everybody listening is that we do know that, the pelvic floor does have to, you have to allow it to go through its full excursion. We know that. And even for a healthy population, I've been talking about, people that maybe have dysfunctions and have an over-recruited pelvic floor, but let's say you don't have an over-recruited pelvic floor. Let's say you're functioning absolutely fine. Even that, I say, when you're moving around and doing different tasks and exercises or activities of daily living, the respiratory diaphragm and the pelvic diaphragm still move, naturally together. And there is something called tension to task. If you want more information, Antony Lowe, Antony, Antony Lowe, he's an amazing physiotherapist in Australia. He came up with that hashtag, just hashtag tension to task, and just talking about the variety of tension in pelvic floor muscles, in transverse abdominis, as you are doing different movements. So it's not like it just stays at one tension, or it doesn't produce just this one force. It moves throughout the task.
There's so much that, I mean, technology is an amazing thing. It might feel overwhelming
I know.
at times, but I think it's pretty fascinating that you can tell me a hashtag and then I can go and look this up.
Yeah, and it is overwhelming, and sometimes it can be anxiety provoking. But this Antony Lowe, he does even have online like little webinars, and
Oh, great.
Julie Weeb's work is really good too.
Yes, I've heard of Julie Weeb. Yes.
Yeah. Julie and Antony actually, I think, have done some work together. But yeah, I hope that helps people.
That helps a lot too. Now, if someone said to you in a really basic way, is Mulha Bandha the same as a Kegel? What would your kind of one sentence answer be to them?
Oh, that's easy. I have an easy answer.
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh, that's such a good answer.
I used to equate it, right? Mulha Bandha, engage Mulha Bandha, engage your pelvic floor. Yeah, and then I learned, well, it's a little different because, there's sphincters. Engaging pelvic floor isn't just sphincter action, right? It's that perineum, it's the deeper layer as well. And so you can just engage anal sphincter or not. So then I heard, well, it's more just, an engagement of sphincters. And then I heard that, and actually I liked this, and I taught this for a long time, which was Mulha Bandha was more an energetic lift.
Right.
And I think what I was trying to do because we all have our conformational biases too, and I had heard this, and I thought, ooh, I like that, because then it made sense for me to be able to teach and tell people that, because, okay, let me back up. I knew that you weren't supposed to hold in a pelvic floor contraction throughout the whole practice, or even throughout a whole pose, right? Just from everything. I knew that. I knew it had to go through its excursion, but I couldn't explain what about holding Mulha Bandha? That's supposed to be good, right? Because it keeps that prana inside you. And so when I heard this, well, Mulha Bandha isn't actually an engagement of the pelvic floor. It's more just this energetic lift and something more esoteric that we, can't, it's just so mature or so advanced for us to explain that this is. So I wasn't equating Mulha Bandha to a pelvic floor contraction, which really made me happy. I was like, oh, I like that.
Right.
Because then I can say, just imagine. So then what I was equating it to was just imagine the pelvic floor as you inhale, it's going down. As you exhale, it's pulling up. And just that awareness, and I do a lot of pelvic floor awareness practices and breath practices, was Mulha Bandha. It was just that awareness. Well, that didn't last very long because then I realized I was kind of just making that up. And I'm embarrassed to now admit that.
Please don't be embarrassed. That's so helpful for teachers out there.
Like I was trying, it's good intent. I was trying,
Yes.
right? I was just trying to explain and trying. And I'm learning even more, like, don't make stuff up. Like, that's just, even though I didn't, and it's funny, Shannon, even at the time, like, I didn't feel like I made it up. Like, I felt like, oh, I heard this and oh, that makes sense. And then you're reading and it's just a weird thing that kind of happens. And so now where I'm at is, Leslie Kaminoff's, work really, again, made sense to me. And does that make sense to you? Like, yeah, because that is what the bandhas, from what I understand, and then from what I remember, not just from Leslie, but from other trainings that I remember. Yeah, it's from, when you're doing the pranayama practice.
Yes. Yeah, that's mainly when it was done, right? Even Kundalini, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so engage the bandhas. And then I just thought, oh, that makes sense. It just kind of got lost in translation. So you're not supposed to, hold and engage that through an entire practice. And regardless of what Mulha Bandha is, and really you can almost say, well, maybe it's semantics and language, because what I know now is, like I said, biomechanically, I know how to teach people how to be aware of the pelvic floor. I have some tools on how to be aware of the excursion and how to help engage the pelvic floor. So I have some tools and some ways for yoga teachers and others to cue engaging the pelvic floor without actually saying engage the pelvic floor. Because remember, not everybody can do that, right? And if a lot of times they do it wrong, so I have their blog on that, 8 ways to help your yoga students engage the pelvic floor.
Right.
I have
a blog on that massive one that I'll link to. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for your wealth of knowledge. We will definitely be in contact again, because I know you have a lot more to share. That was maybe the toughest part, is just to pick a couple of things to talk on and limit it with you. So thanks for your time.
Well, you're welcome. And it was so fun. And I hope that your listeners found it valuable. And that's my intention and my wish.
I'm sure it will be for them.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.
Okay, thanks. You too.
So there you have it, connected yoga teachers. Thank you so much, Shelly, for all of your knowledge and information, for sharing your expertise in all things pelvic health today. Thanks also to Kim Vopni and Trista Zinn for taking part in this 3-part mini-series on pelvic health. I've put a link to Shelly's website in the show notes. It's physioyoga.ca. Again, physioyoga.ca. And there's lots of other links there. Shelly shared a lot with us. The best way to hear how you can work with Shelly further and to hear about her upcoming courses is to sign up for her newsletter. If you have questions or you'd like to connect with us further, please visit our website, theconnectedyogateacher.com. That's where all of the show notes are. That's where the button to join our Facebook community is. And there's lots more there. Thanks so much, Connected Yoga Teachers. Have a fantastic week.